Let's start, though, here in Ottawa, where MPs grilled Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan again today. Sajjan appeared before what's known as the Status of Women Committee. They're digging into allegations of sexual misconduct that go straight to the top of the military's chain of command. The minister was questioned about his handling of a sexual misconduct allegation against the military's top commander 3 years ago.
Why did you not suspend General Vance?
I immediately took it to the appropriate independent authorities.
When the ombudsperson came to you and tried to bring something forward, you refused to hear him.
If you end up interfering politically in an investigation, somebody who has the confidence to come forward, you can undermine that entire investigation.
The allegation was made in 2018 against former Chief of Defence Staff General Jonathan Vance. Vance is now facing a military police investigation. The man who brought that allegation to the Defence Minister 3 years ago is Gary Walbourne. He served as military ombudsman from 2014 and until 2018. He joins us now for an exclusive interview. Hi, Mr. Walbourne. Good to meet you, and thank you very much for making time for our program tonight.
Thank you, Vance. Glad to be here.
Just a quick recap for our viewers. Last month, you told the Defence Committee that you'd raised concerns about inappropriate conduct from former CDS Vance with the Defence Minister. You offered to show him some evidence, but you said the minister declined to see it. The minister said he took those concerns to the Privy Council, which in return said that they did not have enough there to merit an investigation. Since your testimony, the minister has repeatedly said, including before the Status of Women Committee today, that you could have done more with those allegations, investigated them or referred them, for example, to the military police for investigation. What's your response to that?
Well, that's totally incorrect, Bessie, because we need to go back and remember how this started. When the complainant approached me, the request was they'd only come forward if I would guarantee them confidentiality. That's what I did. So with that confidentiality in place, my hands were a little tied. Now, if you look at the organizational chart, the minister is above me on the organizational chart, and as my direct, I'll call him supervisor, I thought that would be a legitimate or logical place to go to look for some advice on what could potentially transpire.
And so when you hear the minister continually saying that, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm frustrated because he knows the difference. You know, I explained to him before I went to show him the evidence that this person had come forward. You know, concerned about their career, their family, and all the things that come with that, and had asked for confidentiality. And one of the things, you know, the cornerstone of ombudsmanry is confidentiality. So I guaranteed the complainant that confidentiality and went to the minister looking for advice. So in reality, he had no authority to turn it over to the PCO, or I had no authority to go talk to JAG or anyone else in the system. I went to the minister looking for advice.
And the minister has also said that that if he had interjected there, if he had done something with the evidence, for example, that you had with you, that it would amount to political interference, that in fact it was not his role to do so. And what do you make of that argument?
Well, in my opinion, actually, that's a little weak. You know, the minister, there was no investigation ongoing. It was a concern raised by a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. She had come to me looking for confidence and assurance. I had given her that at my level and went to the minister looking for the same. So, you know, I find that response a little bizarre.
In a perfect world, what would have happened that day? What would have happened with that process when you first brought this individual's concerns to the minister? Would he have referred it to something beyond the PCO for investigation? Were his hands also tied, do you think, to a certain degree because the complainant or the person, the individual in this case, didn't want, you know, confidentiality broken? What do you think in the best case scenario could have happened?
Well, the case scenario, you know, we can suppose what may have happened, what could have happened, but we need to go back to the facts. The facts are, I had given a member of the Canadian Armed Forces confidentiality as an assurance. I went to the minister looking for advice. What could have happened, Vance? Could have been a conversation. He could have at least spoken to me about the evidence I was holding. But instead, he pushed away from the table, said no, and contrary to what he says, he never gave me any advice, and he never spoke to me again.
I'm sure you've thought about it. Often you've been asked by multiple MPs. Why do you think that is?
I can't really answer that question. You know, I have, like everyone else, I've got an opinion, but I really have no fact or basis to answer that question. I have no idea why it transpired the way it did.
I understand. On the issue at hand, the idea that this individual was did not want to come forward themselves, wanted some confidentiality. In essence, it speaks to the difficulty that so many of these victims have in reporting what's happened. How big a problem do you think that is?
I think it's a huge problem, Vance. I've been complaining for years about independence. If the entity that the complainant has to go to is tied into the structure of the Department of National Defence, reporting into the Deputy Minister in one lane and the Vice Chief of Defence Staff in another, you can understand where the reluctance to come forward is. And as long as they stay tied under the department, I think you're always going to have this going on underground, and people are just not going to bring it forward because they don't trust the system to be independent, to give them a fair shake.
And it's interesting that you point out you've been saying that for a long time, because you have. So did, you know, the initial report on sexual misconduct talked about the need for independence in a lot of these structures. Do you think that is ultimately where the solution lies here? Like, does that action actually need to be taken? Because I think a lot of Canadians are watching all this unfold and worried for a lot of those people who don't feel comfortable reporting, or who have reported and don't feel comfortable with the structures currently in place.
Well, the current structures we've seen is not doing the job. You know, the SMRC, I think it's been said, has reached its life limit. It is there for great victim support. I tip my hat to Dr. Preston and her crew. I think they've done some good work over there. But that's where it's going to stagnate if it stays under the department. There can be no independence when you're investigating yourself. That just doesn't work. And there can be no independence when you're tied to the Department of National Defence because you have to hold your hand out for your budget monies or your HR authorities. You can't have independence. You know, to say independence, look up the definition of the word, and it doesn't include any of these strings that we see attached.
And even though you have been talking about independence for a number of years, why do you think it is that there's been resistance to it? If you could attempt to pinpoint why.
Well, I don't think anyone likes to have someone look over their shoulder. I don't think anyone likes to see an auditor come in. Well, I've always liked to see an auditor. I think they give you new ideas. But, you know, to have someone look over your shoulder, you have to look at the Canadian Armed Forces. It's a military organization. It's been in existence for hundreds of years. So there's a lot going on in there. It's an environment that's been built up over, like I said, decades. They're used to doing their things their way. But I believe this societal issue needs a different venue. And maybe they're just reluctant to allow that type of scrutiny to be in hands other than the Department of National Defence. I can't see any other reason. The simple solution to this is form an independent body that can do the work that needs to be done.
As you watch all these committee hearings unfold, do you have any optimism that the situation will be addressed, that the situation will be rectified, or are you discouraged by some of the testimony that you hear?
Good question, Vance. I don't have a lot of faith. The roadmap, the plan has been given to this government over the last 4 or 5 years. I've talked extensively about independence. I think they're going to come up with some hybrid half model that is not going to give the independence we're talking about. I think for some reason I keep hearing talk, you know, behind doors that it's going to be a hybrid model where there'll be some authority outside and the rest of the authority will remain inside. I just think we're going to muck it up. We're going to make some half hybrid situation that's not going to move us forward. It'll look good on paper, but at the end of the day, if it's not fully independent and outside the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, I think it'll be an exercise in futility.
And what do you think the greater consequence of that would be?
Well, you know, when you talk about the Canadian Armed Forces, I think when you talk about national security, they would be the cornerstone of our national security. So you need to start looking at recruitment, retention. Those are the issues we'll face, Vance, if we don't get this right. And God knows we've had a few chances at it. I don't know how many more we will get. if we don't get it right, I don't want to come back in 6 months and have this conversation with you again. I'd rather not do that.
Completely understandable. Mr. Walbourne, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time and your insights very much. Thank you.
You're welcome, Bessie. Thank you.
And as I mentioned, we are joined now by MPs. Anita Vandeveld is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. Candice Bergen is the Conservatives' Deputy Leader. And Lindsay Matheson is the NDP's critic for women and gender equality. All three of them are with us from Ottawa. Hi there. Thank you very much for making the time tonight. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can talk about both of what Murray outlined there. And let's start off with what happened during committee today. And Ms. Vandeveld, I'll start with you because we spoke to the former military ombudsman, Gary Walbourne, right off the top of our show. The minister keeps saying Mr. Walbourne should have done more with the complaint about former Chief of Defence Staff Jonathan Vance. I'm just wondering if that's really fair, though. He went to the minister for advice because someone was worried about coming forward. Wasn't it reasonable to expect the minister to at least have a conversation with him and maybe provide that advice in the interest of doing what was best for that victim?
Well, I think what's been very, very clear, and it came even clearer this week with Ray Novak's testimony, is that the proper authorities to look at an allegation like this is PCO. And both in 2015 and 2018, you did see that in 2018, the minister immediately, within a day, brought that to PCO so that they can then try to investigate and see how to pursue it further. But one of the things in the committee today that I think was really important is, first of all, the minister said that he is open to all recommendations. He wants to hear from the committee. When I talk to survivors, they're saying the finger pointing doesn't do them any good. What they want to know is how are we going to fix the problem? And from General Eyre, we heard today that there are policies that are in place that are well-intentioned, like duty to report, that we really need to take another look at, because the best processes in place, if people are still afraid to come forward, then those investigations aren't going to come forward. And that's, I think, what we've seen in both 2015 and 2018. What we need to do is listen to the women. The Status of Women Committee had an opportunity. I had put a motion to hear from experts, academics like Dr. Maya Eichler, Rebecca Patterson, who is the Canadian Armed Forces CAF champion for women. We brought forward Julie Lalonde, a very renowned feminist. Other names, Dr. Preston, the head of the Sexual Misconduct Response Centers. Unfortunately, all three opposition parties voted against having those witnesses come to the Status of Women Committee. We want to hear from the people that know what the answers are. And Minister Sajjan made it very clear, as did the General Eyre, that we are really listening to know what we do to improve these processes that are in place.
I take your point on all of that. I would point out just two things. First of all, many of those people have already given testimony, have been interviewed at length, and a very comprehensive report about what the government and what the military needs to do was produced back in 2015. With respect to your other comments about the proper mode for investigation, my question was not about that. It was whether or not the minister is being fair in saying that it's Mr. Walbourne who should have gone to the military police to force more investigation or to further this. Like, is that fair?
I think what you have here is you have Mr. Walbourne, and we know now through media reporting that this was about an inappropriate suggestive email from 2012. And Mr. Walbourne did not produce that email, probably because we don't know about that. He said there was no consent from the person. Minister Sajjan, even regardless of the he said, Mr. Walbourne knew that he could take anything to the National Investigative Service, to the Provost Marshal, to the SMRCs. There were a number of avenues. But ultimately, since it was the Chief of Defence Staff, Minister Sajjan brought that to PCO. PCO, without a copy of the email, without the name of the person, and they tried several times. They brought Mr. Walbourne the very next day. But there's not much more you can do about an inappropriate email when you can't get a copy of the email or even the name of the person. And I think that's very different than in 2015, when what was brought up at that time to the Conservative government, and it was actually Aaron O'Toole who brought it forward, was a rumor about an inappropriate longstanding relationship with a subordinate. That is a completely different thing in terms of the potential to investigate.
Okay, let me get Ms. Bergen to weigh in on that, because I think what Ms. Vandeveld is alluding to is testimony yesterday, Ms. Bergen, that there were some concerns about about an inappropriate relationship just prior to the appointment of former CDS General Jonathan Vance. The Veterans Affairs Minister at the time, who's now the leader of the Conservatives, Aaron O'Toole, flagged that with the PMO, but it doesn't appear, made a whole lot of effort to follow up on if there was more to do, if there was more to say. Your party has been very critical of Minister Sajjan for not doing the same thing in the 2018 instance. What's the difference?
Well, there's a big difference, Vashi. What we saw in 2015 was a minister who heard a rumor, didn't have an ombudsman come to him and then say, no, I don't want to see the evidence. He heard a rumor and he took the appropriate action, as opposed to what we have seen not only the Minister of Defense do currently and the Prime Minister, whose story has changed a number of times. They knew of serious allegations. They told the Ombudsman, don't tell us anymore. We don't want to hear about it. They then basically cut off funding from that Ombudsman and then gave General Vance a raise and a promotion. So very, very different. And at the end of the day, again, we have women who are being disrespected. And, you look at the time when these allegations came forward, and you have to remember the frame of mind of the Prime Minister at the time. This is just when the groping incident came forward. The Prime Minister would have been thinking, oh, my goodness, I've got my own inappropriate groping I'm having to probably answer for. Maybe he thought this woman who came forward in the military experienced it differently. I don't know. But at the end of the day, we have women who have again been disrespected, disregarded, and thrown under the bus by this Liberal government. So you can have all of the processes in place, but when a Minister of Defense and a Prime Minister, which has happened with this Liberal government, refuse to take action and responsibility, these women, sadly, and men and women in the military have been really disrespected, and they've been failed by the Minister and the Prime Minister.
Is the distinction as clear as the one you're making, though, Ms. Bergen? I mean, a rumor is a rumor. It doesn't look like there was active follow-up on Mr. O'Toole's part to ensure that Mr. Vance's record was as clean and clear as it should be to be appointed to that position. The same criticism that I understand that your party makes against the current government, right? Like, why didn't they make sure things were crystal clear when they gave him a raise? Why didn't your government make sure things were crystal clear when you appointed him?
Well, I think when you look at the evidence, our leader took appropriate action. He didn't push the evidence away. He heard of a rumor. He immediately reported it. But we're dealing with what's happened today, 2018 and on, where a minister was presented with evidence and he refused to see it. This is very, very serious. The Prime Minister's story has changed at least 3 times. What does that remind you of? You can ask Jody Wilson-Raybould or Jane Philpott about when the Prime Minister changed his story. Why is it that this Prime Minister constantly is changing his story and women are suffering because of his inconsistencies and his double standard? And I go back to that point in time. Recall, it was the summer of 2018 when allegations, not just allegations, but proof of Justin Trudeau inappropriately groping a woman. And instead of taking ownership, he said it's time for us to learn, and maybe women experience it differently. I don't know about the women on this panel, but we all know that there can sometimes be men like that. This was the Prime Minister that not only said that, but when he heard of allegations of General Vance, he put them aside. He said, it's not my responsibility. And he, to this day, is not admitting that he's failed the men and women in uniform.
Ms. Vanderbilt, I'll get you to respond to that in a second, but I do want to get Ms. Matheson in as well. And just on the question of looking ahead, the testimony from Lieutenant General Eyre, as well as what the former ombudsman said on our show tonight around whether or not the solution arrived at is truly about an independent mechanism to deal with this stuff. Mr. Walbourne had said he had heard that perhaps it might be something more hybrid at play, and that just wouldn't deal with, wouldn't cut it, essentially. Based on what you've heard from the Lieutenant General, do you have confidence that the military will implement what is necessary to fix this?
I have to say that I was impressed with the acting Chief of Defense Staff's response today in committee. He seemed to truly understand power dynamics, the authority issues. He talked about different sorts of justice, different alternatives that can be at play. But ultimately, we do need to look at the fact that report after report after report has specifically said that there needs to be that independence. And that needs to be away from the chain of command, that very toxic culture within the Canadian Armed Forces. And unfortunately, it's going to take a long time to get through that. I've spoken to some of those who are serving, who have served. They say that this has to start from the very bottom and go through the ranks. This has to be in a new entire education, relearning. That again, this will take time, but we need to have that independence. More than one report again has called for that. I hope to hear from former Supreme Court Justice Marie Deschamps again about this. But one of the things that I wanted to address with that Ms. Vandenbelt had said was that they tried to bring forward all of these panelists. The Liberals are fully aware of the fact that they could have done that at any stage, and the committee remains open to, at any stage, once we've heard testimony, to fill in some of the blanks on the report that we need to from expert witnesses coming forward. But they haven't acted on either the 2015 report or the report that came through the Auditor General or the report that came through that Status of Women Committee from 2019, all saying the same thing.
Ms. Vandenbelt, your response to that?
Well, I would like to correct something that keeps being repeated that is actually not a fact. People keep saying, and I heard it again from Ms. Bergen, that the minister did nothing. The minister refused to insert himself politically in an investigation, which ultimately could have gotten somebody off on a technicality. What he did was, within hours, bring it to the appropriate authorities. And in fact, he's been criticized by Mr. Walbourne for doing that. And those authorities brought Mr. Walbourne in the very next day. And at that point, PCO wanted to investigate. So, and then they even followed up. The office followed up with Mr. Walbourne and asked him.
But is the minister, is there any responsibility on the minister once Mr. Walbourne and PCO say, hey, we can't use this email because the victim does not feel comfortable with it? Is there any more responsibility incumbent on the minister to say, let's make sure everything is actually okay with this person who is leading the effort to stamp out sexual misconduct?
And this is exactly the issue, and this is what we're trying to resolve, is that regardless of how many assurances are given, I think the minister has stated we are looking at an independent reporting structure, that as long as, and they're right, as long as this is within the chain of command. It was never set up for the chief of defense staff being somebody who has allegations against them. This system needs to be fixed. We've got in the Defense Committee a study coming, as well as Justice Fish, on the military justice system. We need to be open to that. The minister has said all options are on the table. We do need to have an independent reporting structure. Everything that's
fully
happened
independent?
I mean, of course, like that's something that's right now. We're looking to the committee to be able to give that kind of feedback and that kind of input and recommendation. And I frankly think, having sat on the Status of Women Committee in the beginning of my political career, it has a tremendous ability to put a gender lens on this, to bring survivors, to bring witnesses and advocates who understand the issues, and really provide recommendations of where we can go forward. And I thought you saw today the minister and the acting chief and the incoming vice chief showed that they are very, very willing to listen to that and to make sure.
I want to get in a final comment from Ms. Bergen and Ms. Matheson. I've already gone way over my allotted time. My apologies. Ms. Bergen, you first.
I'll just quickly say, I wish we would have heard the minister and the prime minister say, we wish we'd acted more. Saying you have zero tolerance for sexual misconduct and then your action is zero action doesn't bring a lot of credibility. So I think we would all have felt better if the minister and the prime minister would have taken the responsibility and said we should have done something and not just sat on our hands and ignored this. So, I mean, you can have all the programs and all the processes in place, but when the man at the top chooses to ignore what he knows, nothing's going to change.
They're contending, of course, that they didn't ignore it. Ms. Matheson, last word to you.
I would have to agree with Ms. Bergen. There are those in positions of power and authority who didn't take the responsibility that they needed to. This government has known since that Deschamps report in 2015. They've known before that, but it was very clear that action needed to be taken. They know what kind of action they needed to do. 6 years has passed. It hasn't happened. And they have to take responsibility. It's their job.
Okay, I have to leave it there. Like I said, I went way over my allotted time. I do appreciate all your time, though. Thank you so much to Anita Vandenbelt, Candice Bergen, and Lindsay Matheson. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.